On this week's episode of the Best of Johnston County podcast, we have a special edition episode, Ask Jonathan Breeden Anything. And in this episode, myself, Jonathan Breeden, and our social media coordinator, Raina Burks, discuss multi-state custody jurisdictions. What state does have jurisdiction to enter a custody order? What state can modify a custody order after the child has left the state? And what do multi-state custody orders look like? Do you have to take the kid to the airport? Do you have to fly and pick the kid up? How far would you have to drive to meet somebody halfway before the court might say, you know what, it's better to fly? If you've thought about these questions or had these questions, this podcast answers a lot of them, so listen in.
Welcome to another episode of Best of Johnston County, brought to you by Breeden Law Office. Our host, Jonathan Breeden, an experienced family lawyer with a deep connection to the community, is ready to take you on a journey through the area that he has called home for over 20 years. Whether it's a deep dive into the love locals have for the county or unraveling the complexities of family law, Best of Johnston County presents an authentic slice of this unique community.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Best of Johnston County podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Breeden. And on today's episode, we're having a special edition episode that we like to call Ask Jonathan Breeden Anything. On most of our episodes, I, Jonathan Breeden, interview interesting community leaders, small business owners, and people that just love Johnston County to tell you about why they love Johnston County and what they do to assist the citizens of this county. We also do elected officials, stuff like that. But on these special edition episodes, our social media coordinator, Raina Burks, asked me, Jonathan Breeden, about family law questions in North Carolina. The Breeden Law Office, which I own and founded, does provide family law services to people in North Carolina. So I talk a little bit about just different questions that we get every week as we represent families in our area going through separation and divorce. But before we get to this week's questions, which I think deal with multi-state jurisdiction and moving your child out of state, I would like you to like, follow, subscribe to this podcast wherever you're seeing it, whether it be on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, LinkedIn, TikTok, X, Instagram, or any of the other social media channels of the Best of Johnston County podcast. The Best of Johnston County podcast comes out every Monday. It has now for well over 20 months. So go back and listen to some of our previous episodes if you would like. We've interviewed the vast majority of the county commissioners, Congressman Brad Knott, Tim Sims, local dentist, just a lot of really interesting people. And I think you'll find it interesting and fascinating. I've enjoyed doing this podcast. I've learned so much about the citizens of our county and so many great things about our county. And we're going to continue doing that because our goal is to put out as much positive information about Johnston County as we can through this podcast. Welcome, Raina.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good.
Yeah. All right. So we've got some questions that a lot of people have for whenever there's parents living in different states and they have to do their custody across state lines.
Okay.
So the first one is, how do custody and visitation work when across state lines?
Well, I guess it depends. If you have people living in different states and they don't already have an order, there's all these, you know how it goes right now, but
Yeah.
we can do 20 different examples here, right? But, in general, if you have parents living in different states and there's not already a court order, and one parent starts to think, I might need to get a court order, make sure that I can see my child and have legal rights to my child, then either parent can file a custody action where the child has resided the previous 6 months. And
that's important.
That's important. And I know you're going to ask me a little bit about the Uniform Child Custody Act, which is how that comes from. But just in general, and then the court will, like it does in every other custody situation, look at where everybody's living, how the child's doing, and determine what is in the best interest of the child as to where the child lives, which state the child lives in, and what the visitation schedule between the parents will be moving forward, given that they don't live in the same state. So it's not going to be 50-50 if the child is already in school, and it's not going to be really any kind of joint physical either when they don't live in the same place. But they are going to try to craft as much time as possible for the parent that's not where the child is, it's in the other state from the child.
Yep.
From the child's primary custodian.
Yes. And to that point, you could still live in the same state and be hours apart. And, North Carolina's, this big up and down, but very long, that. So even if they still live in the same state, it still might be kind of the same deal.
Correct.
If they live hours apart.
Correct.
Okay, so number 2, you already kind of mentioned this, but what is the Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction Act?
Okay, the Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction Act is the act that 49 of the 50 states have adopted to determine which states have custody jurisdiction as a child, to determine the child's home state. Okay, the key word is home state.
Yes.
And the home state has the ability to make custody decisions for the child and modify the child's custody decisions. So the home state is defined as where the child has been the previous 6 months before the action commences initially.
Got it.
And that is the state that would have the home state jurisdiction to start with. The state that issues an order, now that's to file it. Now, the home state jurisdiction doesn't actually attach and become binding until that state enters an order, a temporary custody order, permanent custody order that says, we are the home state and we are going to make this decision and this is in the best interest of the child. If you start it, but then the child moves away and you don't get an order, then it's the first state to enter an order when the child has been in that state 6 months. I've had that happen 3 or 4 times in my career. So I now add that as a caveat when I'm asked this question.
Yes,
the state has to enter an order, but it gets started initially where the child has been. The case then stays in that home state until all parties have left the state, not just the child.
Okay.
It's all parties have left the state. So, or the state has declined to exercise further jurisdiction because they believe the evidence of the child's well-being is more likely found in another state.
Got it.
So, an example, you and I go through a divorce.
Yep.
You live in South Carolina. I live in North Carolina. We file the case in North Carolina because that's where we are when we separate. You move to South Carolina. The judge grants you custody in South Carolina of the child. The case stays in North Carolina because I'm still in North Carolina. If we need to modify it, we come back to the North Carolina court, and the North Carolina court will modify it however they deem fit, even though the child lives in South Carolina. After 5 or 6 years of the child living in South Carolina, you could file a motion with the court and say, court, I know that the father still lives in North Carolina, but I want you to release the jurisdiction because the evidence of the child's well-being is in South Carolina. Child goes to school in South Carolina, child goes to doctor in South Carolina, everything at this point.
Primary custodial parent lives
in
South Carolina.
Is in South Carolina, and it would be better for the witnesses for this case to be in South Carolina, and the court could release the jurisdiction or not. Most of the time they would still say no, but sometimes they would say yes. Yeah. Now, the other thing that happens is with this, if I then leave the state and I move to Florida and you're in South Carolina, once I'm out of the state of North Carolina, there's no party still in North Carolina.
Yeah.
So North Carolina still technically has jurisdiction, but another state where the child has been the previous 6 months prior to the motion being filed, which in this case would be South Carolina. Yep. South Carolina could then take jurisdiction, home state jurisdiction, if it finds that nobody is left in North Carolina.
Gotcha.
And we deal with this every day in the Breeden Law Office because we represent people in Harnett County and Fort Bragg in the military. Yes. And so we've kind of become experts at it because the military sends you wherever the military wants to send you. And we deal with a lot of this in our office. And of course, as Raleigh has become more of a international city and people move here every day from around the country, this is one of the fastest growing areas. Johnston County, Raleigh, Wake County, Harnett County. We deal with a lot of orders from other states. The child's not here. The order's in another state. Sometimes we don't know where the other parent is.
Yeah.
We can't absolutely prove the other parent's not in that other state, but we have no clue where that parent is. Yeah. And so it is interesting. Every case is unique. Sometimes you end up with 2 cases at the same time in 2 states.
Mm-hmm. I've seen that, yeah.
And only one state can have the home state jurisdiction, And then if both are pending at the time, then the judges in the two states have to talk to each other and determine which one they think has home state jurisdiction. Because sometimes, particularly with the military, the child has not been anywhere for 6 months.
No, yeah, yeah.
And so if you have a situation where the child has not been anywhere for 6 months and the parents are together in a state, the state that the parents were last together in would have the home state jurisdiction, not the state that the child spent the last time it spent 6 months anywhere, because at that point there's nobody in that state. So while it is confusing, it sort of does make sense. Are there witnesses and parties and evidence of the child's well-being still in the child's home state? If there is, great. If not, then it needs to go somewhere else, because the court needs to be able to gain the information possible to be able to make the best decision for the child.
Got it. Yeah. And so to that end, with the military, because that brings up a question. So when you say, obviously the military moves people around and sends them away for training, sometimes 6 months to a year at a time, or they're completely stationed at a new duty station, but their home state in the military is still their home state according to the military.
Correct.
So how does that work? Like, how long does somebody need to be gone out of the state in order for them to have moved out? Does it have to be a training? Does it have to be a permanent duty station assignment? Or they still get their home state advantage?
The only thing that really affects their true home state of where the military, and they all, whether they're from Florida or not, live in Florida because they don't want to pay the state tax. Right? Like there are 9 or 10 states that don't have any income tax. Florida happens to be one of them. Tennessee's another one. So most military members, even if they happen to be from North Carolina, quickly figure out how to get themselves to be residents of one of these other states that don't charge income taxes. I don't blame them. And that really does affect where they can file for a divorce. But North Carolina, and for custody, it is kind of where the child has been. And so if they have been sort of TD-wide for training, that is not going to be considered a change. Now, if the child goes with them for 12 months and the child is in that other state, well, then yes. But most of the time on these temporary duty stations and the trainings, your family is not with you. The family follows the sort of permanent change of duty station that happens every 3 to 5 years. You get PCS, you get orders to the new place. So we don't usually have to worry about that for the temporary stations. Now, one thing that's interesting is a lot of courts will say if a parent is going to be assigned for 9 or 12 months away from home, that the child goes and lives with its biological parent and doesn't stay with the step parent. And so that gets to be a little confusing. But if you know you're going to be gone for 9 to 12 months, then the court would also often just have the child go stay with its biological parent, not with the step parent, if you're divorced or whatever. Now, if it's a shorter thing, 6 weeks, 90 days, then the court is not going to uproot the child from its school and its activities. But if it's going to be a longer period of time, or you've been assigned to Korea or Japan or Germany, that's a whole nother ball of wax. Right. Because those are usually 2 and 3 year assignments, and you got to decide who's going to have custody of the child. Is the child going to go to these countries or not? And, that's probably its own podcast we'll do one day.
I'm sure it would be. Yes. All right. Next one. And this kind of falls into that. Can a parent move with the child legally if they don't have custody and if they do have custody? How does that?
Okay. A parent should not permanently move a child out of its home state where the other parent is residing without that parent's permission or the court's permission. If a parent permanently moves a child from one state to the other without a court's permission, even if there's not a court case, or without, I would say, written permission of the other parent, then the parent that is still in the state, say North Carolina, can go and ask for an emergency custody order to have the child brought back to North Carolina, the home state and the state of original jurisdiction. And we get those I don't know, probably 3 or 4 times a year.
Yeah.
And we literally go to the other state. We get the police involved in the other state.
Mhm.
They will go and they will bring the child. Our client will go to the other state. The police will get the child, give it to our client. Our client will drive the child back to North Carolina. And then there's a return hearing. We just finished one where the mom took the children to Hawaii. Not once, but twice.
Oh my goodness.
And we had to go to Hawaii twice and bring the child back with the Hawaiian authorities and
That's
all
expensive.
that stuff. Yeah, it was ridiculous. And now that parent, of course, our client has sole custody of those children here in North Carolina, and the other parent has to come here to visit because the court no longer trusts that parent. Because not only did they take the child to Hawaii once, they took the child to Hawaii twice.
Yeah.
So you run into that. Now, if you think you want to move, then you can go to court, and if the other parent doesn't agree, you can have a trial. And the court is going to be looking for several things as to why it is maybe best for the child to be able to move out of state. The court has to look at the reasons for why the parent wants to move the child out of state. Does that parent have a job that's going to better their life out of state? What kind of realistic visitation schedule can the court create with this child if it's primary for the parent still here, if the child is primarily in another state? The likelihood that the parent who is out of state will follow the North Carolina order, which is only valid in North Carolina if it is not formally registered in the other state. So the court has to believe that the parent taking the child to the other state is going to do the right thing and follow the order. And they have to look at what is going to be the relationship with the parent that is still going to be who's going to still be here and not out of state.
Yeah.
And their family and their friends and their support system and that kind of stuff. So it's not easy.
No.
And I would say that the vast majority of the time, the court is going to say no to moving the child to another state. But now the court also has to look at, how did you end up in North Carolina? Did husband's job bring you here and they have no family, no support, and now they're getting divorced? And the wife is going to be the primary custodian and her support system is somewhere else. The court has to consider that. Military, like we talked about, the military has brought these people here for just 3 years in most times.
Yeah.
How much longer is dad going to be here? And mom now wants to go back where she's from, where she has a support system. And dad, even though he's here, is training and gone. And it used to be deployed all the time. Now, we're not fighting everybody's war, so people aren't deployed as much. But you know what I'm saying? So the court has to think about all of that. Did they meet on a dating site? Is that why mom is now here? Because they met on a dating site, and now maybe it didn't work out, and they want to go back. All of this has to be considered. The hardest ones, I think, for the judges are mom is remarried and mom's husband now is having to go somewhere else
for his job.
Right. Those are the absolute hardest decisions for judges to make because, not only are you, and mom may have a child with current husband.
Yes.
And now you really are having to decide, are we going to split this family? What is best? So, or my favorite, which is not uncommon, you were married to somebody in the military, you divorce that person in the military, you marry a different military member. And now that person is getting...
We didn't learn our lesson the first time.
Right. Well, now that, and so I'll often look at clients when they're sitting here and I'm like, wait a minute, you have a child with a service member. You now are married to a different service member's, like you're putting the court in a tough spot.
Yeah.
And I don't know that you're going to absolutely win this.
No.
Because all of this was foreseeable.
Yes, you knew what to expect because you'd been there, done that before.
Correct. Yeah. And I have won several for parents where either I won one not too long ago where I was representing dad. Everybody's living in Clayton. Everything's all right. Nobody was in the military, but mom decided to marry somebody in the military. And he got assigned to somewhere Quantico, somewhere in the DC area. And, the court did not let that child go there on a full-time basis because the child was doing fine.
This is home.
In Clayton, right. And it was clearly foreseeable when mom, and I even had text messages from dad and mom talking. It's like, dad really liked mom's boyfriend.
Yeah.
Like, he was a good guy. They all got along. Well, dad and the boyfriend got along. Dad and mom didn't get along. But he was sending texts to her going, he's in the military. He's going to get a different duty station. Yeah. We're here co-parenting this child. Well, I think he's a great guy. Are you sure about this relationship?
Yeah.
And, and it is what it is.
We all make choices.
Right. And dad ended up, getting to keep the kid here in North Carolina. What oftentimes you'll see the court do is say, Mom, you have to stay here until dad gets a new duty station. And then now everybody's leaving North Carolina. So at the point that he gets sent, wherever he gets sent, Texas, Georgia, whatever, okay, Mom, you're going to be the primary custodian. You need to figure out how to make it here for another 12 or 18 months. And then, and you're going to get child support, post-separation support, and, stuff like that. Sometimes you can stay in military housing if you stay married. And then they'll say, okay, all right, at the point that dad gets a new assignment, Mom, you're free to move about the country. The Southwest commercials, Southwest Airlines, ding, you're free to move about the country. And they will say that. So you do see that. But they are not going to order Mom to follow dad to the next duty station.
No. That's
not going to happen. Now, the other thing we do see a lot, Raina, is military members that get separated from their children, when they get out, they will often try to come where the children are.
Yes.
And that could be upsetting to mom if she's been a sole parent and she's been making her own decisions. And, that causes friction. But, look, those dads absolutely can come where the children are and file and try to get 50-50 custody, and often do. Yeah. So, we do see that sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Have family law questions? Need guidance to navigate legal challenges? The compassionate team at Breeden Law Office is here to help. Visit us at www.breedenfirm.com for practical advice, resources, or to book a consultation. Remember, when life gets messy, you don't have to face it alone.
So, number 4, how do courts handle long-distance parenting plans? Like you said, there has to be the home state, and when they transfer, so how does that transfer happen? Have you ever seen that happen when they've transferred it to another state because of the child had moved? And like you said, they have to talk to each other. How does that work?
Right. So the process is, if everybody has left the home state, then whoever has the child in the state where it had been the previous 6 months would file a brand new action in that state. But they have to attach, but they have to attach the other state's order.
Okay.
So go back to our original scenario. I leave North Carolina, go to Florida. We have a North Carolina custody order. You would file a new action in South Carolina where you're living, and you would say, Dear South Carolina court, I would like to modify this North Carolina order, and you now have jurisdiction because I've been here for 2 years and the other party now lives in Florida and it's not in North Carolina. Here's a certified copy of it, and this is how I would like to see it modified to reflect our new custodial situation where we're now, instead of 5 hours apart, we're 8 hours apart, something like that.
Yeah.
And then I would then be served with the action in Florida, and I would then be able to object and say South Carolina doesn't have jurisdiction. I could try to quickly move back to North Carolina, or I could get a lawyer and defend myself in South Carolina in your motion. Okay. So that's how it goes. Or you have the option to just register the other state's order in your state for enforcement purposes, but you can also register your order in your state for modification if you can prove that nobody is still in the home state. So 2 different ways to bring your order to where you are. You're kind of starting a new case, but the other order doesn't completely go away because you're attaching it saying, I'd like to see it modified in some way. And so that's what happens if the order needs to move. There can only be one valid order per child in the country at one time.
Yeah.
And so that's how that would work. As far as standard visitation type schedules, if your state's apart and it's too far to if it's more than 4 or 5 hours, you can be in different states. I mean, if you're 5 hours, if you're 3 to 6 or 7 hours away, and that means you can be in DC, You can be in Knoxville, Tennessee. You can be
Atlanta.
in Charleston, maybe even Atlanta.
Yeah.
The court will often do long weekends in your state. So if the child has a holiday, whether it be King Day, Memorial Day, teacher work day,
Yep.
stuff like that, the child could come for a 3 or 4 night weekend, whenever that is, and the parents would meet halfway. So there would be 7 or 8 of those throughout the year. And then they would do in the summer, it would probably be like 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, or you get June, I get July.
Yeah.
We split August, something like that on a traditional calendar. So if you're close enough, if it's under 3 hours, you can do every other weekend.
Yep.
And that's not a big deal. If it's 3 to 7 hours, you'll often see that long weekend during the school year. And then that person, if they're not getting every other weekend during the school year, they're going to get more of the summer than the primary custodian. There's 10 to 12 weeks in a traditional summer. That out-of-state parent that's not able to get every other weekend is probably going to get 6 or 7, maybe even 8 of those summer weeks. If it gets to be more than 7 hours away, now we're talking about airplanes and stuff like that, then the child does not come to your home during the school year, except during holidays.
Yep.
But you, in almost every case, will have the right to come to this state once a month and have a weekend with 30 days notice to the other parent, where you can take the child wherever you want in the child state. So if it's in North Carolina, take them to the beach, take them to the mountains, whatever, take them to whatever you want to do. Right. You can come to the child once a month, and the child would then come for probably 6-8 weeks in the summer, would come for 2 weeks, one Christmas, the entire break, one Christmas, and 1 week the next Christmas.
Oh.
So the custodial parent would get every other Christmas, but they're going to lose the entire Christmas every other year. The child would then go to, even in the 3 to 7 hour range, if you're not doing it at least every other weekend, the child would then go to the other parent every spring break from the day school out before the day school resumes. The child, depending on how long the fall break is, can go for the fall break, particularly if it's 3 or 4 days. You know what I mean? The child would go every other Thanksgiving, whether it's 3 to 7 or even out of state on a plane. North Carolina does not go to school on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So the child could fly out on Tuesday night and the child could fly back on Sunday like that. So you'd see every other Thanksgiving, the child would go there. The child would go there every Christmas. The child would go there every spring break and every summer. So in that scenario, if it's outside of 7 hours drive, the child goes to the other parent's home 3 times a year. Summer for a longer period, at least 1 week at Christmas, every spring break, and every other Thanksgiving.
Okay.
So it's still not a lot when you think about the grand scheme of things. You get outside of 7 hours, you're talking 50 nights a year.
Yeah.
Out of 365. I mean, I don't know how much of a parent you can be. To me, at that point, you're a little bit like a fun uncle or a Disney dad, but I mean, things happen, right? Like, I'm not passing judgment, but I do think it is difficult to actually, now, with the invention of FaceTime and Zoom and all the grades being on Blackboard, it's a lot easier than it was when I started this 25 years ago.
I'm sure.
I mean, it is. And kids' games being on, all of my son's basketball games are on YouTube, like a lot of them, and people make videos. And so, I mean, it is way easier now to be involved and be a co-parent from somewhere else than it was even before COVID, to be honest, as technology has advanced. But it's still difficult to be I mean, you can do it. You got to work hard at it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Call the kid every day. You can work hard at it. But as far as physical visitation, that's kind of what it's going to look like. So under 3 hours every other weekend, and then I tell people, you can't do 50-50 for more than about 30 minutes apart. Okay, everybody, I want to do 50-50, but I live an hour apart. That's a little far for 50-50. Most courts, 30 to 45 minutes is about all they're going to do for 50-50. If it gets
Unless the parent who lives outside of the school district is willing to drive an hour 2 times a day, every day, to take the kid to and from school.
That's true. That's true. And I've seen that happen a few times.
Yeah, but not many.
Right. So, and then, if you get to 1 hour to 3 hours, you can do every other weekend, maybe 4 on every other weekend. depending on who the judge is. And then once you get to 4 to 7, maybe 8, that's when you can get the 1 weekend a month if the child has a long weekend. And then outside of 7 or 8, then you're looking at this 3 time a year sort of schedule as far as the child coming there. But in all of these scenarios, if you're not getting every other weekend, for no matter where you are, you will get the right to come to this state in almost every case once a month to visit the child. And I would encourage parents to do that. And I've had parents that love to camp. The parents that have done that ultimately have a much better relationship because they are physically with their child every 30 days. Yeah. And it's not that many times when you think, all right, well, the child's there in June and July. The child's there every other November. The child's there every December. The child's there every March. We're talking September, October, February, April, maybe May, maybe 4 or 5 times a year. The child's not, especially with the way the summer is, the way the holidays are, it makes a huge difference to that child for you to come and spend time with them here and take them to do stuff and maybe go to their games, go to their soccer games or go to their basketball games or whatever they happen to be doing. Yeah. Band concerts, stuff like that. You just have to make an effort. And people that make an effort ultimately are rewarded for a better relationship with their children.
Absolutely. Okay, so the last question, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit. What should go into a travel agreement? I know you said at some point if it's 3 to 7 hours apart, the parents meet halfway in the middle and then, go their separate directions with the child. But is that required? Does the court usually make parents meet halfway? Or if one moves away, does the court say, no, you have to come back and get the child? When there's flights involved, does the parent have to fly with the child? How does that work?
Well, every case is unique. Mm-hmm. Even if you moved away, most courts will have the parents meet halfway in a driving scenario because they want the child to be if the parents are good people, they're on drugs, alcohol, they want to be involved, they're normally good parents, they're trying to be good parents, then the court will still have you meet halfway. As far as the flights are concerned, children until they're 7, I don't believe, can fly unaccompanied minors. So usually in that scenario, the court will have one parent fly to pick the child up and the other parent fly to pick the child up. So the parents would split the cost. The parent would pay for their flight, their round trip ticket to come to get the child from RDU. And then you would pay for your flight to go get the child from wherever the child is. We just did a case the other day in Phoenix. Mm-hmm. This is what the court did. Yep. Our client has to go to Phoenix to pick the child up where the dad lives and bring the child back and then buy that child a one-way ticket if they're over 2 because they have to have their own seat once they're over 2 on airplanes. And so that's
dad has to do the same thing on the way back.
Correct. So it's whoever's picking the child up flies to where the child is, picks the child up, and buys the one-way ticket for the child to come back in the vast majority of the times. Now, the court can split these costs if one parent makes 90% of the combined income, stuff like that. But that's normally how the flight works. Once the child becomes old enough to fly unaccompanied minors and the parents can agree that they want to put the child on a flight that's 7 or 8 or 9 years old from one airport to the other, then the parents would split the cost of that ticket with the unaccompanied minor fee, which is usually $150 on top of whatever the fare of the ticket is. Yeah. If I would make sure that the child has flown a lot and is familiar with flying and is used to turbulence and stuff like that. My children have been flying since they were born. They've been on lots and lots of flights. I would have had no issues really doing that if it was a direct flight, given how much they had flown. But if they've never been on a plane and they've never been in turbulence, I don't know, right? Your child, how mature they are, stuff like that. And then once they get to be like 13, 14, 15, they can just fly. They don't have the unaccompanied minor fee. My son can get through airports now at 15, 16 as well as I can. He's flown so much, find gates, take subways from between terminals, kind of stuff. So really, it's really need to know the child. And the court's going to be interested in what the child, do the parents agree? Do the parents not agree? How much has the child flown? How comfortable is the child doing that? But I think that's all, that's really important. And, and I've watched family members, raise children now that are grown adults, where they were not in the same place. And, one family member flew to Texas where that child was and picked him up for years. And then the child started flying the dad was in Chicago and would fly between Houston and Chicago. And while they never lived in the same place after the child was 2, they have a very good relationship, a very good bond, between the 2 families, because the child went to, they went to that much trouble, for the child to come there every month. I think actually, they were successful people. They could afford plane tickets. I think the child actually went every other weekend.
Oh, wow.
For most of its life. Yeah. So that's not normal.
That's not typical.
Right. But they were successful people. They could afford to buy the plane tickets. That's something they prioritized, and that's important. Right. But it's got to be prioritized. Right. And you got to save the money for these tickets. You got to make the trouble to fly here and do it. Like that's the thing. Like you can do it, but you got to make it a priority. It's got to matter to you. And if it matters to you, it'll matter to the child.
Yep.
And even if the other parent hates you and is making it difficult, the child will see the efforts you're making to be in their life and will respond accordingly.
Yes. So travel agreements should include driving. If you're maybe you need to include a meet spot. Like a halfway point.
Right. And if it's a high conflict case, it should say they have to bring them to the airport, and you have to give them the flight itinerary 24 days in advance, and you have to notify them if the flight's delayed, and then you will bring the child back to the airport at the end of the thing. So in a high conflict case, you got to cover all of that.
Everything.
What airports we're flying from, how far in advance the tickets have to be bought, what time can the flight leave, what time can the flight land.
Yes.
That has to be in there.
Does it have to be a nonstop?
It has to be a nonstop. Does it have to make a connection?
Yep.
All of this in high conflict cases has to be laid out. Hate that, but I'm telling you, if it's high conflict, everything has to be addressed so that everybody's on the same page.
Yep. And the same with driving. You need like I said, you need to have a meet point. You need to have a specific time, a specific day. Like you said, that when school ends and then the night before school begins, and it's got to be, everything needs to be laid out.
Correct. Well, cool. Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Best of Johnston County podcast, where we talked about multi-state custody jurisdiction and how multi-state custody plans work. If you find yourself in this situation or want to know about bringing your custody order to North Carolina or modifying another state's custody order here in North Carolina, reach out to us here at the Breeden Law Office at 919-661-4970 or at our website, breedenfirm.com. We'd be glad to sit down and have a meeting with you and tell you what your rights are. If you don't know your rights, what rights do you have? As we say always, please like, follow, subscribe to this podcast wherever you're seeing it. Leave us a 5-star review down below and share it in your Instagram stories and tag us, the Best of Johnston County podcast. Until next time, I'm your host, Jonathan Breeden.
That's the end of today's episode of Best of Johnston County, a show brought to you by the trusted team at Breeden Law Office. We thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to sharing more interesting facets of this community next week. Every story, every viewpoint adds another thread to the rich tapestry of Johnston County. If the legal aspects highlighted raise some questions, help is just around the corner at www.breedenfirm.com.